Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. Last December, I fled an abusive relationship and crashed with my friend Amy. She lives in an upper-level duplex that's quite small, and I stayed there for a while with my cat and dog, which was a lot, as she has a dog too. Next door to the duplex is a cute old 4-bedroom house owned by Mark, a friend of Amy's who lives abroad. The couple renting Mark's place bought a house and moved out. They suggested that it would be a great place for me to stay while I continued my apartment search. I was absolutely elated and agreed immediately. Mine and Amy's dogs could play every day, and we could still see each other all the time. I was excited about the opportunity and paid Mark some rent, but mostly he just wanted to help me out and have someone house sit until he came home in May. I live in a very cold, snowy climate, so looking for a place in May is exponentially easier. Amy informed me that the house had quirks and a creepy basement. She told me if I ever felt creeped out there all alone, I could come back anytime. She had lived in that house for a couple of years, so I took her word for it. When one of the tenants showed me the place for the first time, I definitely felt something very off. I chalked it up to the weird layout, the draft, and the lack of sunlight in the rear of the house. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom in the middle. The front bedroom was warm and sunny, but the rest of the upstairs was noticeably colder than the rest of the house. Upon entering the back upstairs bedroom, it felt like a downward shift, as if the energy in that room was strange, and I felt like I wasn't wanted there. So I barely looked around and just closed the door behind me. The first couple of weeks, nothing much happened, but I never felt at ease. I felt like I was being watched. I wrote it off as being easily spooked in a large house, and it was my first time living alone. I started having trouble sleeping, despite my room, the upstairs front bedroom, being the only place in the house I felt comfortable. One night, I decided to smoke some weed and watch a movie in the living room, kind of late at night. I fell asleep on the couch and woke up to what I swore was someone running up the stairs and then slamming the back bedroom door. My dog looked startled too and ran upstairs, growling at the closed door. No one was in there. I decided to lay off the weed, but some nights after that, I heard footsteps pacing in the back room. The next thing that started happening was when I was in the bathtub in the upstairs bathroom. My dog would lay in the doorway and just stare at the back room. Sometimes, he would growl or bark at it. I would also come home to find the door open when I definitely shut it, or I would hear my cat meowing to be let into the room. On a couple of occasions, I found my cat shut in the room. Around this time, my bath towel also went missing, and I looked absolutely everywhere for it. It began to take a toll on me. I started having nightmares every night, and I would wake up almost every night to my dog whining between 3 and 4 in the morning. I felt like I was being watched, and the house felt so heavy. I told Amy about all this, and she confessed that she had some weird experiences in the house when she lived there too. Her bedroom was the back room, and a couple of times, she woke up in a semi-dream state to see a man at the end of her bed and began talking to it. Then she woke up for real and saw texts from her roommate asking who she was talking to. She would also see things moving out of the corner of her eye, hear footsteps, and feel like she was being watched. She told me about an instance of seeing footsteps in the snow going from the back door to the middle of the lawn and disappearing. One night, I was in the living room hearing footsteps and just felt so overwhelmed by the presence that I was crying and decided to try talking to it. I said, "Hey, I know this is your house too. I'm leaving in a month. I've been through so much pain these past few months. Please just leave me alone. Please let me know you've heard me." Then the door upstairs slammed, and that was the last I heard for a while. My nightmares stopped. I started sleeping through the night and felt less of the presence. One night, I was hanging out with Amy in her backyard with our dogs and her downstairs neighbor, Sam, to celebrate me finding an apartment. I went back into the house to grab more beers and a sweater. I went to run up the stairs, and standing there, at the top, was an opaque black silhouette. I couldn't make out any features, but it was as real as a person standing there. I screamed, ran back down, and turned on the stairway light, only to find no one there and the back room open again. Finally, my move-out date arrived, and I felt so relieved to feel absolutely nothing in my new apartment. I went back to the house one last time to check if I'd forgotten anything. And there, right in the middle of the floor in the back room, was my bath towel. Still slightly damp, as if I had just used it. Funny prank, ghost. I haven't been back since. My son was 2 years old when all this started. I was sitting in the living room, watching him play with his ball, when it rolled into the dining room. I looked at him and told him to go get it. He started crying and saying no, that there was a man in the dining room who was going to get him. As you can imagine, I jumped off the couch and ran to the dining room, but no one was there. Yet my son kept crying, saying the man was standing in the corner. I told him there was no one there, grabbed his ball, and we went back to the living room. I'd forgotten about that encounter until he was around 3 years old, when my twin sister and our friend were visiting. Our friend kept bugging my son to play hide and seek. She told him she was going to hide in our basement so he couldn't find her. Suddenly, in a voice different from his usual one, he pointed to the basement door and warned her, saying if she went down there, the girl would kill her. I was shocked, especially because he had spoken in a deep, growling voice instead of his sweet, baby voice. I asked him who he was talking about, and he told me her name was Sarah, adding that Sarah was dead. I asked him how she had died, and he explained she was in a car wreck at age 16. She had been with her parents, they'd hit a tree, and the car had crashed into a house. I couldn't believe what he just told us. A few days later, we went to a Mexican restaurant. We visited the restroom before leaving, and my son told my twin sister not to use the stall next to him because Sarah was using it. My friend joked, "Well, how did Sarah get here?" My son replied, "She sat between me and you in the back seat on the way here." I thought maybe he just had a good imagination. Then, a few months later, he grabbed my hand and said, "Mommy, come here. Your friend wants to say hi to you." I followed him into his bedroom, holding his hand, and asked, "Where is he?" My son pointed and said, "He's standing right there, Mommy." Then he added, "Jamie says to tell you not to be sad anymore." I was stunned and asked him where he had heard that name. My son said, "He's standing right there. That's what he told me to tell you." Jamie had been my boyfriend in high school, and he had passed away in a car wreck. A few weeks later, we were going through old photo albums, and my son pointed to a picture, saying, "I know that man." I asked how he knew him, and my son replied, "He comes and talks to me." I then explained that the man couldn't talk to him because it was a photo of my father-in-law, who had passed away before I even met my husband. My son insisted, "I do talk to him." He told me about taking Daddy for rides in his old Ford truck when Daddy was little. I asked my husband, and he confirmed that his dad had an old Ford truck they used to go riding in. A few weeks later, my husband and I were in the living room when we heard our son laughing and talking to someone. We both got up and went to his room. I asked, "Who are you laughing with?" He turned to us and said, "I'm playing with Mama." My husband's mother had passed away when our son was 2 years old. I asked him what she was saying, and he threw his hand up and said, "Hey," in the exact way she used to greet him whenever he entered the room. My husband had to be at work at 5 a.m. every morning, so I would always get up, make him breakfast, and pack his lunch. One morning, after he left, I was sitting in the living room when I noticed something in our bedroom. I got up to see what it was and saw 2 girls standing in the mirror, brushing their hair. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was just seeing things, but they were still there. When they noticed I was watching, they disappeared. Later, I asked my son about it, and he told me, Sarah came for him and isn't leaving until she gets him. That scared me deeply. The disturbing part was that my son, who had always been healthy, started having unexplained stomach problems. Doctors ran all kinds of tests but couldn't find a reason for his sickness. When he was 11, he started having seizures. Again, doctors couldn't find the cause, only noting that both sides of his brain showed seizure activity, which is unusual. Eventually, we moved out of that house, and he got better. I wondered if it was the house causing his illness or something in it. We recently moved back into the house we used to live in, and his stomach problems have returned. My husband and I had separated for about 8 months, which was why we moved out, but we've since moved back in together. I grew up in the countryside in Ireland, literally in the middle of nowhere. The house was originally a small cottage. My parents bought it before I was born, renovated it, and added an extension. There were 5 other houses on our country road, the closest being across a large field. I don't know much about the history of our house, the land it was built on, or the area, other than that an elderly lady lived in the cottage before my parents bought it, and she passed away in a nursing home. The only information I have about the area is that it was old and part of a civil parish. Civil parishes in Ireland are units of territory with origins in Old Gaelic divisions. Some other things are worth noting before I get into the experiences. Behind our house, across a newly built road, was an old graveyard and the ruins of an ancient church enclosed by a stone wall. When I say old, I mean the gravestones were tipping over, sinking into the ground, and you couldn't read the writing on them anymore. You could see the graveyard from my and my brother's bedroom windows. When they built that new road, while I was still a kid, archaeologists discovered signs of an early medieval monastery on the site, dating back between the 6th and 9th centuries. They also found signs of medieval settlements, some artifacts like tools from that time period, and evidence of burial activity, including scattered human bones and remains. In the field next to our house, there were also ruins that looked like a small cluster of old stone houses, with something similar further down the road. So, on to the experiences. Whenever we get together as a family, we always end up talking about the house and what we experienced. We moved out 6 years ago. I don't know who or what it was, but there were definitely multiple spirits. It felt like a lot. I don't know if it has anything to do with the graveyard, the archaeological findings, the house itself, or the land. I really don't feel like it was the woman who lived there before us either. My mom, dad, 2 brothers, friends who stayed over, and I all experienced something, or at least got a weird vibe. Interestingly, almost everything that happened took place in the new part of the house rather than the old part, and things happened outside too. I often felt like someone was in my room, and for some reason, I felt it was a man. I would never relax in my room alone, and I dreaded nighttime because I felt like someone was there. I heard sounds like someone moving around, not exactly footsteps, but the movement of someone, and often felt watched, both inside and outside the house. On multiple occasions, I heard what sounded like children talking and playing, but no one was there. Once, I heard what sounded like a choir singing from the direction of the graveyard and church, and on another occasion, I heard drums playing in a repetitive rhythm that was hard to describe. Another time, I was outside, playing near the side of the house. I was kneeling down when it felt like someone threw a small stone or pebble in my direction from behind. It happened 3 times within about 20 seconds. I turned around, but of course, no one was there. Another time, I went to bed early when it was still bright out. I remember this so vividly, I can even remember the duvet cover I had. As I was lying down, wide awake, I felt someone poke me hard in my lower back. I froze, freaked out, didn't turn around, and convinced myself it was just one of my Teddy's paws. I didn't think about it again until years later. From the living room window, my brother once saw a man in a hat smoking a cigarette, leaning against the wall near the front door. He got up to see who it was, but when he went out, no one was there. And he didn't hear anyone run away, which was odd because you could hear even the slightest movement on the stone chippings. On a couple of occasions, my mom heard someone knock on the back door, but when she went to answer, no one was there. Again, she didn't hear anyone walking or running away. Another time, she saw the silhouette of someone smoking through the back door window, as if they were standing just outside, but no one was there. A few times, she felt as though someone was sitting in the back of the car when she'd leave the house to go to the shop in the evenings. The feeling was so strong she'd keep looking in the mirror and even stop the car to check under the seats. Even my dad, a skeptic, saw a black shadow at the end of the hall moving from one side to the other. My other brother once felt someone touch his foot in bed, and on a couple of occasions, heard what sounded like someone walking down the hallway and stopping outside his door, as if they were going to come in but were hesitating. He would call out to see who it was, but there was no response. He also saw the hallway lights turning on and off, and when he was outside in the back garden, he would often feel an urge to go back inside and would end up running. It was strange because I used to feel that way too. Our dog stared and barked at nothing a few times, and a friend who stayed over hated getting up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, as she felt like someone was watching her from the end of the hallway. So, that's that. Sorry, this was long and a bit rambly. I hope you enjoyed hearing it, and I'd love to hear any of your thoughts on what might have been going on. I've wanted to share this for a while. There was a house in my area that burned down several years ago, back when I was still a child living in my old house. There were no reported deaths, but I beg to differ. When I was around 12 years old, while the house was still relatively fresh from the fire, a friend and I decided to go inside and explore it for whatever reason. We found an unlocked window, climbed through, and, although my memory is a bit hazy, I do remember the staircase being black and ashen, the walls and ceiling torn apart, etc. I also remember walking into a room that looked like a child's room. There was a framed picture of two girls, some family photos, and whatnot. My friend and I left soon after. The house was remodeled, and frankly, I forgot about it. A few years later. My family and I moved from our old, small house into a new 2-story house in our area, the same house that had burned down. Things were fine for a few years. I didn't experience anything strange. However, around 2 years ago, I began seeing and hearing things, mainly in my room, but occasionally around the house as well. It started off with voices, especially as I was trying to sleep. I have no history of any mental health issues, so this was a new experience for me. I'd be lying on my side, trying to fall asleep, when I would hear a woman's voice singing in my ear. She would sing, whisper unintelligible things, or sometimes even speak, but I could never make out what she was saying. It felt surreal, as though she were right next to me or above me, but every time I turned around to see who was there, no one would be. This then escalated to hearing the voices of two girls. These weren't in my ear, but seemed to come from around the room. They would sing children's songs and rhymes. Then, I began hearing constant knocking on my door and the floor creaking as though someone was walking around. I even called out a few times to see if anyone was there. I'd ask my sister if she was at my door, and she'd always say no. This went on for a while, before I actually began to see her, not the kids, but the woman. I'd catch glimpses of her all the time, but they were always just split-second sightings, before she disappeared. She would appear in the creepiest places and positions too. Often, I'd see her in the corners of the ceiling in my room, right above my head, on all fours and clutching the ceiling. I saw her like this once as I walked past my sister's room as well. Other times, I'd see her walking down the stairs with her head down and hand on the rail. Sometimes she would stand in my room and just look at me. Again, I would only see her for a second at most, but the memory is so vivid. Strangely, she has never scared me. Sure, the knocking and voices freaked me out at first, but when I actually began seeing her, there was no fear at all. It was quite calming, actually. I even tried to talk to her sometimes, though she never responded. Nowadays, I don't see her as often. The kids' chants have stopped, but I still occasionally hear her whispering or humming in my ear when I'm about to fall asleep. I've moved rooms, so maybe that's why. Sometimes I do end up sleeping in my old room, and those are the nights when I hear her the most. My cat, however, still stares at the door, the ceiling, or an empty spot in my room. Sometimes she hisses, sometimes she just meows. I've told my mom and my sister about my experiences. Neither of them has seen or heard her specifically, but they both believe me and think there's something wrong with our house. I'm not really sure where else to turn. Strange things have been happening in my house for about a month and a half now. Prior to that, nothing abnormal had ever really happened. Around the time this began, my dad started renovating the basement, particularly 2 rooms we don't ever use. I've only been in them maybe 5 times in my life, and I'm 22. A few days after my dad started taking the walls out, I was home alone and taking a shower. All of a sudden, somebody started pounding on the door and jiggling the handle. I assumed my younger brother was home from work early and had to use the bathroom, so I yelled for him to stop. I got no response, and the pounding and knob turning started again. I looked out and saw the handle turning, but I didn't see the shadow of any feet under the door. There's a 2-inch gap where you can see if anyone is standing outside it. After the pounding stopped for a while, I ran upstairs to my room to hide until somebody got home. I heard my dog barking furiously and decided to go downstairs with a baseball bat because, at this point, I thought somebody could be in my house. I went down and found my dog barking and growling at the empty bathroom. I lured him to my room, where we stayed until everyone got home. A few days later, my dog woke me up to go outside around 6 a.m. I heard movement and voices from the kitchen, and the light was on, so I thought my mom was late for work. When I got to the kitchen, the noises stopped, and I saw all the cars in the driveway were gone, so nobody was home. The other night, I fell asleep with my TV remote next to me. I woke up in the middle of the night, just in time to watch my TV turn off. And somehow, the remote was on my dresser. I thought the power might have gone off, but my lights never went out. Then there was a strange, loud tapping under my bed that lasted about 3 minutes. It wasn't rhythmic, and I know we don't have any rodents. I am so shaken by these experiences that I hate being in my own house. I don't know what is going on, or how to make it stop. I should note that my house is very old, and there have been 2 confirmed deaths within it, one of whom was my very unfriendly great-grandfather. Is my house haunted? Or am I spiraling into insanity? Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.